Why was Michal angry with David, and what was David's response? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Samuel on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 16 to 23, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 16. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Samuel chapter 6, beginning at verse 16. Now as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. Then he distributed among all the people, among the whole multitude of Israel, both the women and the men, to every one a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, and a cake of raisins. So all the people departed, every one to his house. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, How glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. So David said to Michal, It was before the Lord, who chose me instead of your father and all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord. And I will be even more undignified than this, and will be humble in my own sight. But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. For almost 100 years, the Ark of the Covenant had been separated from the tabernacle after its capture and the return by the Philistines back in 1 Samuel 4 through 6. The tabernacle had left Shiloh, and for a time had been in Nob until Saul killed the priest there, after which 1 Chronicles would tell us it would be at Gibeon, a city in the tribe of Benjamin. But David didn't want the ark to go there. He wanted it in the city of David, which was in Jerusalem, the place where the king was, thus combining the political center, with God's anointed, with the religious center, God's presence, which dwelled between the cherubim, the Ark of the Covenant. Now we saw in the last lesson how David at first transported the ark wrong, and Uzzah died when he touched the ark trying to steady it. After David repented, he came and transported the ark properly, which was by the poles on the shoulders of the sons of Kohath, which were Levites. With the ark now arriving at Jerusalem, there was much fanfare to be had. David was dressed in priest-like attire, meaning a white linen ephod rather than royal robes. He was dancing for joy among the people with the trumpets playing, what we might call a raucous party today. Now let's not accuse David of lascivious dancing. This was a dance of joy, not a sexualized dance. And let's also not use this passage as a pretext for religious dancing today, for the New Testament is our guide to proper worship today, not the Old Covenant, as earlier in this chapter would illustrate. When the ark came into Jerusalem, David put it in a tabernacle made for it, which was probably fashioned after the Mosaic tabernacle. We know from 1 Chronicles that this wasn't the Mosaic tabernacle, though, in Jerusalem, for that would be in Gibeon during the reign of David. Why wouldn't David have reunited the ark with the Mosaic tabernacle? Perhaps that has something to do with what we'll read in chapter 7. But what we know for certain is that David wanted the ark in Jerusalem, but didn't reunite it with the Mosaic tabernacle. David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord, showing us his joy for the ark finally coming to Jerusalem. Now, just like in 1 Samuel, by David offering sacrifices to God doesn't mean he directly offered them. We know from 1 Chronicles that priests were present on this occasion, and so they would have prepared and offered those sacrifices on David's behalf. Thus, David wouldn't have committed the same sin that Saul did in 1 Samuel 13. David blessed the people before the Lord and then distributed to the people present sufficient bread, meats, likely from the peace offerings, and cakes for them to travel home with. So with the public celebration done, David too returns home to bless his household. Unbeknownst to David, his wife Michal, Saul's daughter, has been watching all the goings-on from a window, and she is angry with David. The question is why? Well, she says that it's because he was behaving immodestly in how he dressed and how he danced. But I doubt that's really what David did, for in David's response he said he would do more so before the Lord. If David had been acting in a lewd manner before God, doing more so would have been even worse. Rather, what it appears that she is mad at is David putting off his royal attire and putting on the humble attire of the ephod, which the priests wore, and getting all worked up among the people about some religious relic that her father allowed to remain largely hidden during his entire reign. In David's response to Michal, he chastises her by reminding her that God had rejected her father as king and installed him instead. Why? Well, at the root, it had to do with Saul's pride. Saul started off as a humble man, but as he became more powerful, he became more arrogant, which caused him to sin against the Lord by taking the place of a priest and offering sacrifices. His pride got in the way of his repentance for all his transgressions, and Saul was rejected. David wasn't going to follow the same path. He was going to act humbly before the Lord, which was denoted by his dress in this instance, and he was going to worship God joyfully from the heart. And if Michal wouldn't view this as honorable for the king to behave this way, the people, including the maidservants for whom she claimed to be representing in their shame, would. This was a rather harsh rebuke for the daughter of Saul, a call not to walk in the arrogance of her father. The chapter concludes by telling us that Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children until the day of her death. Whether this is because God shut her womb because of this incident, or because David didn't have sexual relations with her anymore because of this incident, we cannot say. But what we can say is that she did not have any children. With the ark in Jerusalem, what did David want to do next? We'll find that out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 to 17, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.